So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Miss Lola Massey to talk to us about the first critical 48 hours.
Picture this. Your cell phone rings and you take the incoming call after checking the time. It is 6:11 a.m. and your boss at the mobile forensic unit is on the line. He is telling you that a body has been discovered under suspicious circumstances. You have to get to the scene quickly. When you arrive, you are told that the body temperature was sampled and it is estimated that the victim died 10 hours ago. You got lucky. Because the body was found within the 48-hour time frame, your chances of finding the killer are increased. Hi, I'm Lola Massey, and welcome to my Masterworks presentation entitled 48 Hours, a Critical Time Frame for Solving a Homicide. Ever since I was young, I've loved crime. Not so much doing it, but more reading about it. I loved hearing stories about solving crimes. It first started with Nancy Drew and mystery novels my dad would read to me, but that later changed to homicides. In fact, my 5th birthday party was at the Vancouver Police Museum. You can imagine how much fun my guests were having. When it came time for me to choose a Masterworks topic, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to say that some of the content may be disturbing for some viewers, though I have made conscious effort to not include overly graphic material. I will argue that in murder cases where the body is found within the first 48 hours of death, the case has a higher chance of being solved than if it was found after that time period. The longer a body has been left undiscovered, the less reliable estimates based on physical condition become. I will also be examining a case where a body was found in the early hours after death, and then the same case later while going through decompositional changes. I will begin by giving some background information on the crime scene, the body, time of death and how to determine it, which will help you get a better understanding on the case that I will present later. I will then introduce one professional in the field that holds much controversy. More important to my thesis, I will be talking about evidence that is present on the body before 24 hours. This will then lead into my first part of my case. After that, the second part of my case will be introduced. At the crime scene, the first priority is to preserve life and help the victims. Officials must detain witnesses and restrict access to the crime scene to make sure suspects do not return to the scene to tamper with the evidence. Clothes and evidence are taken for testing, and the victims, ideally, should not bathe before a medical examination, in case that would wash away evidence. Nothing on the crime scene can be moved unless by a professional gathering evidence. The job of the first people on the scene is to secure the scene and record as much information as possible. And the key job of the forensic identification specialist is to document as much as all the elements of the undisturbed scene. When identifying and gathering evidence, everything on and around the scene must be searched thoroughly. Because of bad weather, outside crime scenes are prioritized to be searched first, so evidence is not destroyed. Public places like parks and buildings are also searched first. Though the crime scene is very important to search, so is the body. Okay, this is working. Okay, there. Before moving the body in a suspicious case, the scene must be photographed, sketched, or videotaped. At the scene, the coroner's examination focuses on elements likely to change once the body is moved to the morgue, where a more comprehensive study of the deceased takes place. The coroner at the scene will check for rigor mortis, which is the stiffening of the muscles, by gently trying to bend limbs like the jaw, the neck, the arms, and the eyelids. Through examination of the body, it is possible to identify if the remains were moved after death. When someone has died, their blood stops pumping through their body, and gravity takes effect, causing livor mortis. Lividity appears as the same color due to blood pooling on the lowest parts of the body. For example, this person had died, and this is the lowest point of the body where all the blood was pooled. There was another surface here, which was the person was lying on. That's what you can tell. So if this body was found and there was the prints of, there was a surface there, but then the blood pooling was there, but then they were on their stomach, you could tell that it was moved because the patterns on the back didn't match what was the position that it was found. Lividity evidence can only be seen in the first 48 hours, which is another reason why the first 48 hours after death are the most crucial in a forensic investigation. All the factors I just described are crucial in examining when a person passed away and the circumstances of their death. Embedded in the scene and body will be crucial evidence to determine how a person died, and if it was a homicide, by whom. That's lividity, livor mortis. Okay. Cause of death is the disease or injury that leads to the death of the victim. If the victim had pre-existing health problems and was involved in a shooting that damaged his internal organs, then later died of pneumonia after he was discharged from the hospital, the cause of death would be the gunshot wound. This is the case because the gunshot wound set all his other problems into motion. The mechanism of death, however, was the organ failure, because that is what ended his life. The reason that pre-existing diseases were not the cause of death is because injury always trumps disease. There's also manner of death. The manner of death is the way in which someone was killed. Though there are many, many causes of death, there is only 5 manners of death: undetermined, natural, accidental, homicidal, and suicidal. Natural deaths occur with disease and no trauma. All other methods include trauma. Accidental deaths are where an event took place that was unanticipated by everyone involved. Suicidal and homicidal deaths arise from acts where intentional harm, injury, or death occurs. The difference between suicidal and homicidal deaths is who committed it and to who. Investigators spend a lot of time focusing on when the victim died. When trying to estimate time of death, there are a number of options available to the examinators and investigators. If a body was found in the first 48 hours after death, professionals could use rigor mortis, algor mortis, or livor mortis to show how recently the victim died. Rigor mortis is a stiffening of muscles that occur after death. This happens when the glycogen, which is used to provide energy for the contraction of muscles, is used up following death and is not reformed. Rigor mortis starts appearing with the first 4 hours of death and disappears from 24 to 36 hours after death. After this time, because of decomposition, muscles get flaccid. Algor mortis is the cooling of the body after death. In order to measure the body's temperature and get an estimate of the time of death, the ambient temperature has to be lower than body temperature. So the outside temperature has to be lower than the body temperature. The general rule of thumb is that for a nearly nude body to be exposed to 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, a temperature drop of 1.5 degrees per hour will occur for the first 8 hours. For example, the normal body is about 37 degrees Celsius. So if the body has been dead for 4 hours, it will be 31 degrees Celsius. Algor mortis can only be used to estimate time of death in the first 24 hours. This is the case because it's so finicky. Clothes, ambient temperature, and surface of the body was on, and more can affect the temperature drop. Livor mortis is the discoloration that occurs once the red blood cells begin to settle and the blood stops circulating. This can be seen in the first minutes of death. Lividity, or color change, becomes fixed after 12 hours. This means that when you push on the skin, your finger won't leave a white print, and the skin will stay the same puce color. Lividity evidence can only be seen in the first 24 hours since death. Ambient temperature has a large effect on how quickly a body passes through the different stages of postmortem. Heat causes rigor and livor mortis to move more quickly through the body, and cold will slow it down. Direct sunlight with a temperature over 37 degrees Celsius will cause decomposition to begin in a couple of hours. Cold, on the other hand, will slow down the beginning of decomposition. Without anything to preserve it, the body will deteriorate and become moving into an advanced postmortem state. It will deteriorate faster if the body is exposed to sunlight and air, and less rapidly if buried or submerged in water. Another way to estimate time of death is by using insects, or as forensic scientists call it, forensic entomology. The most common use for insects in entomology is estimating time of death. Forensic entomology is the scientific study of the colonization patterns of insects found on a decomposing body. Most insects come to eat a corpse, but they do not all come at the same time. They do, however, come in a predictable order. By using the knowledge of that order, as well as knowing how long each insect stays on the body, entomologists can determine a time of death. Because most insects on the decomposing body are larvae, half of the insects collected by forensic entomologists are raised on beef liver in the lab in order for them to reach the adult stage. Then you can see what species they are. The remaining insects are preserved at the scene to stop development and used as a reference for how far along the development has occurred. Investigators at the crime scene are also able to estimate time of death using non-medical methods. The first thing investigators look for in a crime scene is the presence of a watch. The watch can be close to or on the deceased, and it is likely when the victim died, maybe from heavy impact or a large fall, that their watch would stop working, maybe on the exact time that they died. Investigators also look to see when the mail was last collected and if there were any receipts with the date and time in the garbage. All these methods are accurate, but may lack precision. For example, entomologists can tell you how long the bugs have been on the body, but they don't know if the bugs started coming immediately after the victim died or if there was a delay. When estimating, they will tell you that the person has been died for a certain amount of time or more. If entomologists calculated that the bugs had started to colonize the body 8 hours ago, they would say that the person died 8 hours ago or more. They say this because they don't know how much time passed before bugs started to arrive. Time of death is always an estimate, and the forensic pathologist makes the final call on the terms of cause, manner, and mechanism of death. The longer a body stays undiscovered, the less precise are the estimates based in changes in physical condition. The accuracy may still be there, but there is potential for more caveats to be introduced to the estimation. This reduces the precision. Because it is harder to make accurate estimation on time of death when the body is left undiscovered, finding it quickly is important. Figuring out at what time the victim has died is important in finding if the suspect was guilty or innocent, and it can solve a case. For example, Betty and John were good friends. They were together from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. After this time, John left to go home. Betty's mom came home at 9:30 p.m. and found her dead. John was questioned by investigators. He told police that his friend Betty was alive in the time frame that he was with her, but investigators soon found that not to be the case. They pinpointed the time of death based on rigor mortis to be between 4 and 6 p.m. This will make investigators focus on John as the primary suspect. The lay or eyewitness can also be involved in homicide cases, but it's proven that the witness is not always reliable and they do not always remember details of the scene or the assailant correctly. Their testimony could be changed because of past knowledges or experiences. If a witness told an investigator they saw a man walking away from the crime scene, most would say that women do not need to be questioned as suspects. But what if the person the witness saw walking away the crime scene was actually a woman with short hair? When witnesses say that they saw someone at the crime scene who looked about 25 years old, the investigators will actually look for suspects between 12 and 40 years of age. So now we're just going to do a little activity. So I want you to, whoever guesses the right amount of passes between the white team wins a prize. So just count how many passes they need.
How many what?
Passes. On the white team.
Awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. Did you see the moonwalking bear?
before 24 hours. During an investigation, the quicker the body is found, the better. Many crucial factors, including DNA, fingerprints, and fingernail scrapings, may disappear or be contaminated in the passing of time. Fingernail scrapings can be used to collect DNA from under the nail and can last an average of 2 days, the same amount of time as saliva. Just like someone could leave their fingerprints on a surface, they could also leave behind biological material that contains their DNA. DNA includes blood, bone, semen, saliva, hair, follicles, skin, and muscle cells. DNA is used in forensic science by comparing evidence containing DNA at the crime scene to those of the victims and suspects. Fingerprints can stay on a surface for up to 2 years, but they can be contaminated and even destroyed. If the killer goes back to the scene, he or she could use harsh chemicals, UV lights, and heat to destroy DNA. If someone finds the body before the killer goes back to the crime scene, if that is their intent, there would be more evidence preserved. As David Carter, a professional at Michigan State University School of Criminal Justice, says, the most crucial time is between the actual homicide and when the police are called. During that time frame, evidence can deteriorate and the suspect gains distance from the crime scene. Before we get into the case, here's a quick recap of what we talked about. Which of these may change after 48 hours? Who thinks that Rigor Mortis will change after 48 hours? Who thinks Rigor Mortis will change after 48 hours? Liver Mortis? Okay. Do you think there will be crime scene contamination? Okay. Do you think the cause of death would change? Okay. Do you think the manner of death would change? Okay. Do you think the mechanism of death would change? Okay. Perfect. Case examination before 48 hours. You'll see. In this section, I will be talking about a homicide case. I will be telling you about what evidence could be present on the body and on the crime scene in the first stages of death. I will then talk about what you might see if the body has been left undiscovered for multiple days or weeks. This will help you get a better understanding on why finding the body quickly could make it easier to solve a murder. On July 5th, a body was discovered by hikers, and the remains are of a woman who appears to be physically assaulted and killed. The body was discovered outdoors in a wooded area, not in the direct sun, so shaded, yet summer temperature. The death appears to be due to asphyxiation, which is the strangulation with someone's hands. The regular July temperature in Vancouver reaches a high of 22 degrees Celsius. We know that the warmer it is, the faster the body will decompose, and the body in direct sunlight could start decomposing within the first few hours of death. But because the body was not in direct sunlight, it won't decompose at such an exceedingly fast rate. If the body was found in the first hours or days, bruising may still be on the neck where the victim was strangled. There could also be marks from the assault and possibly the assailant's DNA. When the body is found quickly, the suspect could have less time to flee, which could lead to the police finding him and searching their house. When the search takes place, it could lead to the discovery of tree needles or other environmental evidence on the suspect's shoes and coat. When tested, it could show that those tree needles were the same as those that were on the forest where the victim was killed. This is an example of the Lockhart principle. The suspect had unknowingly taken incriminating evidence from the crime scene. Another thing that is helpful about finding the body quickly is that liver, rigor, and rigor mortis can be used to estimate a time of death and focus the investigation on a specific time frame. By doing so, you can rule out suspects because of their location in that time frame or find a suspect guilty. Case examination after 48 hours. The longer until the body is found, the more time the killer has to get away from the crime scene. Days or weeks after the death, saliva, DNA, fingerprints, and footprints have very high chance of being contaminated or destroyed. Because the victim was strangled, there is a high chance that the assailant didn't have a weapon. This could mean that the assault probably didn't result in any deep wounds or cuts, or very few. Because of this, decomposition can make wounds very difficult to see. Body injury and evidence would also be obscured by marbling. Beyond 48 hours in hot temperature, you might not be able to determine the manner of death because there is no soft tissue on the remains to examine. And it is also that the greater the chance that scavengers will get to the remains. When looking for a killer, determining cause of death is really important. The wound could tell you what weapon was used, but because the victim was strangled by hands, this does not apply. But if you could see the wound and determine what weapon was used, you could search a suspect's house and find the murder weapon. If scavengers have gotten to the body, wounds that occurred post-mortem could make cause of death harder to see. Because of decomposition, after a few days, you would not be able to visually identify the victim. You would then have to go to dental records, footprints, fingerprints, DNA. These processes take more time than visually identifying someone. I have spent the last school year researching something I've been passionate about since I was very little, crime and criminology. The topic I chose included my interests in forensics and crime, as well as the puzzle-solving aspect of murder cases. Discovering that a lot of crucial evidence disappears with time was not something I knew until I started researching these topics for my essay. I always was interested in homicide cases and how investigators cracked them, but I didn't know I could turn that into a Masterworks topic. It wasn't until I researched how to solve a case that I discovered forensics. This project has given me amazing new insight into something I am deeply passionate about and has possibly shown me what I want to do in the future. During this project, I was extremely lucky to have been able to visit SFU criminology lecture that my external advisor, Jody Ann Warren, was teaching. That lecture was the reason why I wanted to explore this particular topic for my Masterworks. I was also able to interview Corporal Dominic Toa from the RCMP. He gave me new insight on his work and many answers to questions I had. During this experience, I was lucky to have many supportive people who were always happy to help, which leads me into my next slide. This project could not have been possible without the support of my family, my external advisor, and my internal advisor and my two external advisors. First, I would like to thank my parents for constantly reminding me that I need to work on my Masterworks and always being available to talk through my paper and presentation. Thank you for believing in me, though with my procrastination, that might have been hard to do. I would also like to thank the first person on my advisory committee, my internal advisor, Victoria Van Schoen. Thank you for always keeping me on track and giving me great suggestions. You always seemed very interested in my topic, and that made me more confident. I am very happy I got to work with you through this school year. I'm also extremely grateful for my two external advisors, Jody Ann Warren and Neil Boyd. Thank you, Neil, for helping me at the beginning of my project and helping me find the path I wanted to take. You were extremely helpful to me. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank the last person on my advisory committee, Jody. I cannot begin to express how grateful I am for your dedication through my project. You have made it significantly better, and I am honored to have worked with you. Thank you for meeting me multiple times, even though I knew you were busy, and thank you for taking on the big task of advising me. I would also like to thank Corporal Dominic Toa for meeting me and Corporal Paulo Arriaga for setting me up with him. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for coming to my Masterworks presentation.